Welcome back to the study of the book of Daniel. We are at the beginning of chapter 7. If you want to grab your Bibles, we'll really be starting back at verse 4. We kind of ended last session with me reading verse 4 through 7. I'm not going to do that again, but we will go back through it and look at the meanings of this. So tonight's a great night. We're going to start unfolding a lot of this symbolism that we're going to see. So we finished really last time speaking about chapter 2 versus chapter 7 and the two dreams, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar and the statue, which represents humanity seen through the eyes of a pagan king, and then chapter 7, which is seen basically through the eyes of God. And so we're looking at a humanistic and a characteristic. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we look at this tonight. Remember, verse 4 told us this. It said, "The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it." Now, so this first beast that comes up out of the sea, remember that was representative of the Mediterranean or of a sea of humanity, was like a lion. Now, the national symbol of Babylon was actually a winged lion. And I'm going to show you a picture of the Ishtar Gate. And if you look at the lion really close, what you will see is you'll see feathers on where wings would be. And so the one that's kind of blue, that is the Ishtar Gate. The other one I'm showing you is from just one of the other monuments there. So once again, when we look at this prophecy, how precise it is, we can see that Babylon was representative of this lion and of its wings. Jeremiah actually describes Nebuchadnezzar as a lion. If you look at Jeremiah 4:7, it says this: "The lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of nations is on his way. He has gone forth from his place to make your land desolate. Your cities will be laid waste without inhabitant." Just remember that, Nebuchadnezzar, being the gold head, kind of the first kingdom, he ruled the world. God gave him that, allowed him to do that. And so Jeremiah, who was 100 years prior to this, in his prophecy, was 100% on track. And just remember that with prophets. In order for a prophet to be a prophet, every single thing that he says has to be 100% correct. If it's a little off, then he's not a true prophet. And so just be very careful. Remember, it tells us in the last days that there are going to be false prophets that come among us trying to deceive. And prophecy has to be 100% correct for it to be prophecy. If it's not, it's just probably a poor story. Okay, so just always remember that. Now, it's kind of ironic when we look here in 4 because it kind of goes along with what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. It said that his I watched till its wings were plucked off. Remember him being plucked off? Yeah. Remember his arrogance? He stood up and pretty much stomped his foot at God, and God did what? He drove him in to the wild for 7 years to live as a beast eating grass. And so this king, this lion with wings, had its wings plucked from it, okay, and just became a lion for a while. But he was a beast. But then it tells us that he was brought back, and he stood back on 2 feet. We know that he was reinstated, okay, and he was given a man's heart. Remember his heart. We believe his heart. He turned towards God. He speaks of this very clearly at the very end of chapter 2. I want to say it's 33, 34, 35, something like that is the verses. But you can see very specifically Nebuchadnezzar turning to God at the end. Then we look at verse 5, and it's going to show us the second beast. And it says this: "And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. Okay, so we have this bear. This is the second beast that comes up out of the sea. And it is like a bear, and it's got these three ribs. I'm going to show you just an illustration. It's a drawing, a picture of this, just for you to kind of get in your mind. And why a bear? Well, within the Bible, a bear always is very ferocious. It is always symbolized as something very ferocious. It's the characteristics of a bear were very similar to the Medo-Persian Empire. They were ferocious in the way in which they did things. They typically overpowered their prey. They just did it with brute strength, and that's kind of what a bear does. You know, when a bear goes in and attacks, it throws its whole body weight on, and usually it's biting at the head and trying to crush the animal. It's not slashing it; it's just trying to crush it and devour it through its size. And history teaches us this. This is kind of how they fought. The Medes, the Persians, they would bring massive armies to the battlefield. There's actually one account of them having over 1 million soldiers going into a battle. It's even hard to comprehend, but that's just kind of the way they did it. They just wanted to hit people as hard as they could with as many as they could. Plus, it was very greedy, you know, and bears can be they're very territorial, and they're very greedy when it comes to food. You know, I love the animal kingdom, and I love watching shows about animals and you know, any kind. But you know, you think about the big brown bears up in Alaska and stuff, and how they fight over a salmon when there's other salmons right in the river, but they're going to fight for theirs because it's theirs. It also says that it's raised up on one side. So as you look at the picture, you can see it's kind of raised up. And what does that represent? Well, it represents that one side was stronger than the other. All right, so if we think about the Medes and the Persians, it kind of started off with the Medes kind of being a little stronger, but then Cyrus the Great and the Persians took over, and really the Medes became subservient to the Persians. And so once again, very, very specific in its description as we see this bear. And then it's got 3 ribs in its mouth, okay? 3 ribs in its mouth. What does that mean? Well, if we look into history, what we see is that the Medes and the Persians actually conquered 3 different kingdoms. The first one was Lydia, and I've got a map, and that was in 546 BC. And then just a few years later, 7 years or so, 539 BC, they conquered Babylon. And then about a decade later, they went down and they conquered Egypt. And so we see that this bear has got 3 ribs in its mouth, and the 3 ribs being representative of Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. All right, so once again, just how specific and how perfect this description of this animal. And then it says, and arise and devour much flesh. And we know that's exactly what they did. They went after everybody, the Medes and the Persians, conquering and taking as much spoil as they possibly could. Then we get to verse 6. And verse 6 tells us this. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and the dominion was given, now remember this, right here at the end, and dominion was given to it. Dominion was given to it. Well, the leopard represents the Greeks. All right? Alexander the Great, that was one of the things that he was known for, was swiftness. But see, a leopard is very swift. It's very cunning and hunts normally at night. It's very strong. If you ever watch any, once again, animal videos on leopards, leopards will take full deer and they will carry them up into trees and put them up into trees where no other predator can get to them. Very strong, very cruel. They break the neck. They bite on the throat to choke out their prey. And they have a huge appetite for blood. They're an animal that's going to lick up all the blood from its prey. So this leopard had wings, and this wings represented the swiftness at which this leopard would come upon its prey. They defeated the Medo-Persian Empire in 330 BC under the leadership of Alexander the Great. Now, the crazy thing is that Alexander just died just about 7 years later in 323 BC, just about 7 years later. Actually, he died in Babylon. And he was one that just kind of, and he was only, I think, 32, 33 years old whenever he died. But Alexander created this strategy, this military strategy called Blitzkrieg, and it was used with the Germans in World War II. But Blitzkrieg is focusing on a very specific target and moving your troops as fast as you possibly can into that target and overwhelming, not really being too concerned about casualties, just doing everything that you can to put your whole army into a very small area of focus as fast as you possibly can, trying to get the enemy to break ranks and run because of fear. And that is exactly what Alexander, that was one of the military strategies that he would employ on the battlefield, is trying to be very swift in his decision making. And the Greeks were very good at this. The four heads of this leopard, I thought this was very interesting. The four heads of the leopard represents this. When Alexander the Great died, he had four generals, okay? And these four generals pretty much, for the most part, broke up his kingdom, really kind of against his wishes. That's not what he wanted. But they broke up the kingdom because they all kind of wanted to be, I guess, the next Alexander the Great. And they kind of went their own way, never really to ever gain back the power, the prestige that they had when it was the one being. You know, it is said, and remember I told you when I was reading this, at the very end of 6, it said, and dominion was given to it. All right, just remember that, because I'm getting ready to tell you about something. There's a battle in the ancients that talks about Alexander had 35,000 troops, and that his 35,000 troops went up against between 200 and 300 of the Medes and the Persians. And the Greeks defeated that army. All right, and people have talked for centuries about how great of a general Alexander was. And he was, but just remember this: God gives kingdoms. He raises up rulers, and he tears and takes them down. And so it tells us right here that, you know, as genius as everybody thought that Alexander was, he was given his kingdom by God. God used him, all right, to fulfill his will. And it tells us right here that the kingdom was given to it. So no matter how great we think that we are, all right, or how big a control we think we're in, God is in control. And I know I've said this time and time again. Just want you to remember that no matter what's going on in the world, that God is on the throne. It is playing out exactly the way that he has designed it. And like I said, we don't always understand it. Most of the time we don't. But the one thing that we do or should understand is that he is on the throne and he is in charge. And because he is in charge, we know everything will be okay no matter what happens on this earth. Okay? And, you know, just one last thing about Alexander. You know, the way in which he conquered, and remember his kingdom ran really from the Mediterranean all the way, you know, he went all the way to India. In his conquering, the one thing that he could not conquer was himself. You know, he pretty much died a drunk and depressed, and that's a very sad thing for somebody who supposedly had everything in the world. The one thing that he did not have was happiness, because he was outside the will of God. He didn't have the hope of the Lord Jesus Christ at all. So now let's look at the fourth beast, number 7. Now the fourth beast is going to be a little more. I don't want to say confusing, but there's a lot of different layers to this fourth beast. So let's read it, and then let's go back and let's break it down. Verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay? Now, the other 3, we were told, pretty specific the way in which they looked: a lion, a bear, a leopard. This one is just a beast, and a lot of times, if you look at drawings, it is represented by something like a dragon, and that's okay. All right. Matter of fact, I think I'm going to put that up there. but it's dreadful. It's terrible. All right. And it really don't matter, but it's going to speak of, we're going to look at several different layers here of the Roman. It's speaking of Rome, and then it's also going to be speaking of the revised Roman Empire. So we're going to be looking at a time shift here in just a second. Remember that Rome kind of came into its own around 63 BC. That was whenever it kind of finally conquered the Greeks, and it became a very dominant world ruler, basically, kingdom. It was very imperialistic. It was very cruel, and we see that, it talks about this fourth beast being dreadful and terrible. They were very materialistic. Just remember what Rome did. Rome crucified Peter. They beheaded Paul. They banished John to an island. Now, John, wrote Revelation on the Isle of Patmos. They burned and they fed Christians. They fed them to the lions. They fed them to any kind of wild beast. They burned them. They burned them at stakes. They did all sorts of things for their pleasure. All right, and they crucified our Lord Jesus Christ. They crucified him, but they were allowed to do that, and that's what this picture is showing. Is that everything that we're talking about, God allowed them to do it. It was not, they did not catch God off guard. The one thing that you're never going to hear God say is, "Oops," all right, that's not going to happen. All right, it was in the plan. Just remember this, though, that Rome was never really defeated. It just kind of fell apart over time. So much of Western Europe today and the countries around the Mediterranean are still a part kind of that Roman Empire. It's very, very, very common. A lot of the Germanic tribes and stuff that came down, there was intermarriages, and so it just kind of went away, per se, as far as a mighty kingdom. But Rome continues today. It just does not have dominion. Okay, and so then we're kind of seeing this transformation from this very terrible beast with these iron teeth. Okay, remember that the iron legs of the statue represented Rome, and then we have the revised Roman Empire, which is the clay and the iron feet. Okay, which do not mix, and it's going to crumble because the rock hits it. Right? Remember that. All right, so now that's kind of where we're going to see this transition. And then it says here in 10, I'm sorry, not in 10, but at the end it says that it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, now these 10 horns are representative of the revised Roman Empire. These 10 horns are the kingdoms to come, whether it's city-states or where it's kingdoms or what, we just know that there's going to be basically 10 kingdoms that's going to rule simultaneously. Okay, all right. So just remember that there was never in all of the Roman Empire, there was never 10 parts to the Roman Empire. Just remember that. So we see kind of the switch. So we look at the first of the terrible and it being the iron teeth, and now we're jumping to the 10 horns. So now we're going to start looking at these future events. It's speaking of these future events. Just remember that the 10 toes of the statue, this tells us that it must be in place, that these 10 toes must be in place, all right, before Jesus' second coming, all right? Now, I know we've taught and we've talked about it. The second coming is not the rapture of the church. The rapture of the church happens before. The second coming is when we come back with Jesus, and that is representative of the rock that cracks the feet, that destroys the empires. So that's going to happen during the tribulation time, but it's not the rapture. The rapture will happen prior to it. So you see people, and I've been there and I've studied it, with the EU, all right, the European Union. I'm not sure how many there's in it right now, 14, 16, something like that, but everybody's kind of watching that number. All right, just remember that our news should really be coming from the Middle East, not so much from here at home. That's the one that we should be paying attention to, all right, because these things have been mapped out for us, and so it's telling us that these things that have to occur before Jesus' return. And so if we start getting close to 10, then that means that the rapture has got to be 7 years prior to that. All right? So we're a whole lot closer than what you think whenever you look at this revised Roman Empire. So just remember this, that what the statue of Daniel 2 and the four beasts of Daniel 7 show us is really this decay of humankind. We have this decay of immorality, brutality, depravity, ungodliness. You know, we are seeing so much of that, the apostasy of the church that's spoken of in prophecy. All we have to do is to turn on the television, you know, and I know that, you know, we do this Facebook Live, or you get on social media and you'll see all sorts of people speaking out against Jesus or about religion and how, you know, it is so false. And the whole reason it goes back to what we talked about in 1 Corinthians is that the natural man just does not understand those things of the Spirit. All right? And so if you go back to the very first of this chapter, what you see is the four winds and the churning of the seas. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. Now, all right, we only covered a couple scriptures tonight, and that's okay, all right? But we will be jumping in, and we will be taking a big look at a major player that's going to be coming on the scene here real soon. But for tonight, we're gonna end it there. Just know we love you so much. I hope that you're enjoying this. Like and share it. Remember, that is one way in which, you know, you may not think that you're an evangelist, but by liking and sharing it, and maybe it going across your feed, maybe somebody out there can hear some of this, and hopefully it's encouraging to them, or maybe it gets them to want to go back to church, or maybe it gets them to want to go to church for the first time. Who knows? You may never know on this side of heaven, but just trust me. God will know, and God will reward you with one of those crowns in heaven because of the work that you do here on earth. Just know we love you, and until next time, God bless.